On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Toronto Raptors send some mixed messages about their intentions over a weekend split with the Jazz and Wizards, but does it really matter when the future seems to be written in ink?
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, March the 10th, and I am your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Blue Sky. You can also find the show on Instagram, and you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server, link in the description of the podcast. It's free to join as always. Also free is the daily Locked On Raptors newsletter. Go to the QR code on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, or the link in the description of the podcast, and sign it up for free to get hot blogs from me 5 days a week. They'll be a little shorter this week. I'm technically on vacation from my day job, and so probably going to scale back a little bit on the newsletter this week as well, but there'll still be good stuff. I'm going to have a little take of the day throughout the week to keep you satiated. You'll get Katie Heindel's awesome League at Large pieces as well. Josh Lloyd fantasy tips as fantasy playoffs kick off this week. You can go subscribe 100% for free. It's much appreciated when you do it. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. All right, on today's show, taking a look at a couple of games for your Toronto Raptors, a couple of weird ones, a 118-109 win over the Utah Jazz on Friday night that for a second seemed like might have had a chance to be a loss until Immanuel Quickley-Scottie Barnes checked in the last 5 minutes and absolutely put it away. A really big game from Quickley. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, get into some of the individual performances from this game, and of course the Saturday game against the Wizards, a 118-117 near victory on the fingertips of Jamal Shead. Again, we will get into the individual efforts from guys like Scottie Barnes, Jamal Shead, Quickley, Poeltl, get to the good, the bad, and the coming up later. But off the top, let's get into, the thing that we've been talking about for over a week now, and it's just going to be the thing that we talk about for the rest of the year, it seems, which is tank strategy and the way the Raptors are handling themselves in these games. And are they doing enough to ensure they lose games? Are they doing too much to take their best players out of games and avoid wins? What does it all mean? Yeah, this weekend, they sent some mixed messages, I'd say, with how they approach these two games against two very, very bad bottom of the league teams in the Wizards and the Jazz. On Friday, it looked like, again, in the late going, like Jakob Poeltl wasn't playing in this game, RJ Barrett not playing in this game. They take out Scottie and IQ in the fourth quarter, and you think, oh, okay, they're just going to let this ride with the bench guys and the 2 ways and the 10 days and the rookies and see where the chips fall. The Jazz cut it, I believe, to 6 with about 5 or so minutes left in the game. And then Darko Rajakovic brings back Scottie Barnes and Immanuel Quickley, and they proceed to put the game away. Quickly, just bombing threes from all over the place. He finishes with 34 points. He was really good in that game against, admittedly, the Utah Jazz. So you got to take it all with a grain of salt. But that decision to put Quickley and Barnes in essentially clinched the game for the Raptors. And it would have been very easy to just not put them back in. It would have followed the trend from the Bulls game, the two Magic games, then the Jazz game, later the Wizards game on Saturday, where they seemed more worried about getting their young guys running late in games. And, if that caused you to lose the game in the process, then, oh no, what are we going to do about that? What a disaster. Like, that seemed like the strategy. And then they kind of went against the program in the Friday game against the Jazz. And I think it caused a lot of consternation. Like, oh, what are they doing? Are they trying to win games now? Are they pushing for the play-in? Oh, my God. And then they're right back to what they did on Saturday against the Wizards, where they take out Jakob Poeltl with 7 or so minutes left after he was awesome all night long with 21, 5 and 5 on efficient shooting. And then beyond that, they, sit down Scottie Barnes. Immanuel Quickley doesn't play in the game, and they close the game out with Jamal Shead, Jared Rhoden, AJ Lawson, Colin Castleton, and Orlando Robinson. And they kind of get back to the script they had followed the previous games in Orlando and against Chicago. And so what do they want here? I can't pretend to fully understand the reasoning for the different approaches to both games. Darko on Friday talked about how, they're just kind of taking it game by game and deciding in the moment how to play it, which as someone who generally exists in a, take things as they come kind of space in my own world, I appreciate. I think playing Quickley and Scottie together in particular, there's value to that. I think we've talked about that quite a bit. That was a big topic of conversation both before and after the game on Friday about how those two guys are starting to come along and really find the chemistry with one another. They're working together a ton in practice, and to see it play out in games, it's been quite encouraging. And I think that game against the Jazz on Friday was a really good example of the sort of two-headed monster that Quickley and Barnes can be, where things were pretty easy for Barnes. He had 22 points, 12 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, 3 blocks. He was kind of everywhere. 8 of 19 shooting overall, 8 of 16 on his twos. You have Quickley coming in, launching 13 threes, hitting 6 of them, 34, 5 and 5. Like, him being on the floor makes life easier for Scottie Barnes. Those guys playing together is useful, valuable stuff for not just now, but more so even in the future as you hope to hit the ground running next season, knowing how everyone interacts on the court. You're going to already have to worry about the Brandon Ingram thing. Be nice to get the Quickley Barnes stuff squared away. So I get wanting to play them together. It just, it seemed like it kind of went against their prescribed model for how they were going to handle games. And maybe they thought, hey, we're going to beat the Jazz anyway. Look at the Jazz. They're terrible. And boy, oh boy, are the Jazz terrible. But when it got to 6, you thought, oh, maybe there's a window here for them to squeak out a loss, to grab defeat from the jaws of victory and go into the game against the Wizards on the second night of a back-to-back with a chance to drop both, which, for the tank standings would have been very useful. I get it. There's mixed messaging. It's unclear. They're trying to split the difference. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too while playing their guys, getting them some run, and then also closing games with their lesser players, for lack of a better phrase, at the end of these games in most cases. And when they don't do that, it feels weird because they aren't picking a lane. They aren't picking a direction. Oh my God, picking a direction. Seemingly the only thing anyone can say about what a basketball team should do. I am just at the point now where I can't really get all that worried about the sort of intricacies of these individual games. I think we've seen against the Wizards, for example, the formula of dropping your guys to the bench, your most important guys for the last handful of games, or last handful of minutes, that is, and throwing out your bench guys in close games is something that's going to produce some losses from time to time, even against the Wizards. It did against the Bulls before. They're essentially 2-2 in games where they follow that strict model of you play some of your guys, maybe not all your guys, and you just don't play them down the stretch. And great. You won those 2 games in Orlando. One of them certainly should not have been a win. The Magic just kind of left it there. They should be 1-3 by all rights in these games. That's a formula I think that is perfectly fine going down the stretch. Yes, I get it. They kind of bucked tradition, bucked the trend in the game against the Jazz. To me, that feels more just like a one-off where they saw the opportunity to get Quickley and Barnes some run in a close game, and maybe they saw value in that too. Again, I'm not here to pretend that they're making logical, sort of sensible, always in line with their thinking kind of decisions here. It is a little bit whack-a-mole. It is a bit all over the place, but I just can't bring myself to care because they're going to end up 5th, 6th, or 7th in the odds. This is where they're going to be. The Bulls keep winning. Maybe you recalibrate your sort of calculus on this thing if the Bulls go on a 5-6 game losing streak and all of a sudden their 6-game cushion in the standings is starting to get trimmed and you're worried you might back into the play-in. Sure, you can recalibrate then and just sit everybody when that happens. But until that happens, until there's any sort of realistic chance the Raptors pass the Bulls in the standings for 10th, let alone the Sixers and Nets, who are still ahead of them in the Eastern Conference standings, behind them in the lottery standings, I just don't think I can get too worked up about the individual decisions within these games, understanding that, yes, it's kind of going to break people's brains because there's not a whole lot of sense to it. It is a little bit all over the place. But ultimately, the end result here is this team probably finishes 7th in the odds. If you look at the Sixers and Nets schedules down the stretch, they're much tougher than the Raptors. The Sixers aren't crazy tough, but they're going to win. They're going to lose a lot of games in that stretch. And so are the Nets. The Nets have a gauntlet of a schedule to close. The Raptors have a 1-game cushion on both teams in the win column. It's going to be really hard, no matter what the Raptors do. As hard as they might try, they could sit everybody. With the schedule they play, it's just the reality. They're probably going to win more games than those 2 teams down the stretch. And so 5th, 6th, or 7th seems where they're going to land. 7th seems the most likely at the moment. And at that point, I'm perfectly content with it. I think outside of being in the top 2 in this draft, which would be great. And obviously you have a slightly better chance of doing that if you're picking 5th versus 7th, or you're 7th or 5th versus 7th in the lottery odds. It's all still completely stacked against you no matter what. And so I'm not going to hand wring over these little micro decisions in games that may or may not be altering the end results anyway. Like the Raptors very well could have just won that game against the Jazz had they kept their young guys in there. Jazz made their run, young guys make a run back, they score 2 buckets in a row, and all of a sudden that game's over. It's just, I don't know, man. It seems like a lot of stress. It seems like a lot of needless worry over a thing that kind of feels written. They're going to probably be 7th in the odds. And if you're 7th in the odds, hey, silver linings, you have a slightly worse chance of a team behind you jumping ahead of you than you do than if you're 5th in the odds. So maybe that splits the difference on where you're at. It's just, to me, you can't argue. There's some value to getting young dudes a shot to play in close games. We'll talk about Jamal Shead in a second here, and the idea of giving these guys reps in games that kind of matter, maybe not fully matter, but kind of matter, where everyone's playing hard and the guys on the other team are kind of laying it out there too. There's a lot of value in that. If they're trying to, if this is their overall, and I'm not saying this is exactly what they're doing, but kind of reading what they're doing, if their sort of grand strategy here is, all right, we're going to play some of our main guys. We're not going to play them more than 25, 30 minutes. And what we're essentially going to do is take games that in a vacuum would be very clearly tilted towards the Raptors to win. We're going to sort of turn these games into coin flips by the way we use our lineups and the way we cut and pull guys out for the last few minutes, and live with the results that the young guys and the bench dudes and the 10 days and 2 days, 2 ways guys, 10 days and 2 ways. Yeah, that's where I'm at. And we're just going to live with the results those guys produce in these coin flips that we kind of engineer. I think that's fine. You're going to lose plenty of games. You're still going to win some games because your schedule sucks and there's nothing you can do about the teams you play. And so with that, I just, again, barring the Bulls going on some kind of run where you really, really, really need to prevent yourself falling into the play-in and the chance that you might, accidentally stumble into the 15th overall pick because you win 2 play-in games. I just think I can't get too worked up about the individual sort of moving of the chess pieces that Darko Rajakovic and company are doing. I think, again, they're trying to make the best of a weird situation that is complicated by the fact that their schedule is like an anomaly of scheduling. It's baffling what they have to close here. And so I guess you just kind of got to make the best of it. I don't know. I'm sick of having takes on this. Let me tell you that. I don't want to be talking about this anymore. I want to just talk about basketball. We're going to do that coming up in a sec. We're going to talk about guys who played basketball on the weekend and what they did whilst playing said basketball and what I liked, what I didn't like, et cetera, all coming up. We'll do that in just a sec. Today's show is brought to you by friends over at DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 2024-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. That's a big deal. There's a bunch of guys putting up 50 burgers these days. Hey, it's March. Sometimes Malachi Flynn's going to put up 50 points at this time of year. Lots of chances for guys to put up buckets, and you can earn yourself some discounts on your DoorDash orders the next day. As a result, go check them out. Again, you can sort of order whenever you want. Late night cravings, lunchtime. You don't want to go pick up lunch or go out or make lunch for yourself. You can order some lunch with DoorDash. It's pretty sweet. Sign up for DoorDash and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 points or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day for $10 off. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active DoorDash or Dash Pass account. That is, terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. Back at it here, talking about a pair of weirdo games from the Raptors against the Wizards and the Jazz over the weekend. We'll talk a little more, but we talk a lot about the Jazz game off the top. We'll get more to the Wizards one. We talk about Jamal Shead momentarily here, but let's run through some performances of note from the weekend that was. Again, this is all happening within March, and so there's only so much to really be gleaned from anything happening in these games because it's just a mess. Like the Jazz are rolling out Micah Potter for long stretches, and oh god, who else were they playing in this game? A lot of Bryce Sensabaugh, a lot of Walker Kessler, who's just, he had 18 and 25 in that game, but man, just still kind of a non-existent basketball player to me, offensively at least. A whole lot of Cody Williams, the Tony Snell of the 2020s. It's a rough scene over there in Utah, man. And the Wizards, of course, are rolling out the Wizards roster, their full freight roster, essentially, and they're still the Wizards. So congrats to them. They picked up a victory on Saturday. As far as performances of note, Jakob Poeltl, pretty good basketball player. It's very obvious that Jakob Poeltl playing makes losing games hard. And I think the Raptors are doing probably the right thing by not playing him in crunch time of these games, because they certainly would have won the game against the Wizards with him in there. They would have probably blown out the Jazz on Friday had Jakob Poeltl been playing. They almost lost that game, or that game was, in question for a little bit, because they didn't really have any centers to throw up against Walker Kessler, who's just a very large man. It's kind of his only NBA skill, which is be large, and he was being large and grabbing offensive boards, et cetera, et cetera. Good for him. If Jakob Poeltl are out there, the Raptors run away with that game. He's a very helpful, useful basketball player. I thought his passing in the game against the Wizards was really nice, kind of hitting guys back cuts every single time down the floor. The way that he just manufactures space as a non-shooter by being a damn good passer from the elbows, it's really, really impressive. Like, you would think that in those situations where he's at the elbow, guys are going to sag all the way off and just kind of hang in the paint. But you can't, because he's going to pick you apart with passing windows and stuff like that if you're not up on him. And when you give him the space to kind of hit guys cutting middle in that space that's opened up because he's pulled out, like, he's going to find guys. He's a good passer. He's not like a Jokic passer, of course. No one's Jokic. He's ridiculous, but he's a damn good passer. He's a damn good offensive connector, real greaser, and obviously a good defensive backstop as well. If you want to see the Raptors shut down Poeltl all the way for the rest of the year, I get it. I understand he's the guy who drives positive functional basketball as much as anybody on this team. But at the same time, if you're trying to develop your Jamal Sheads or your Jacoby Walters, kind of makes sense to have Jakob Poeltl in there as well. He's a useful basketball player, not just for winning games, but for kind of bringing guys along and developing. And again, if you kind of settle in with him at like 24 minutes a game the rest of the way, when in the games where he does play and doesn't rest, it's totally fine by me. I don't mind seeing Poeltl play, but yeah, you don't want to be playing him too much, because he's going to make all these games not coin flips. He's just going to beat these sad, incompetent basketball teams because of his utter competence. He really does seem like not playing him is the cheat code for losing games. There's no doubt about that. Maybe against the teams where you really got to lose, Wednesday against the Sixers, for example, maybe you sit Poeltl just to hope that you come by and lose. But yeah, it's he's good. He's a good player. It's nice to see him playing well. Nice to see him back. Another guy who was really good was Immanuel Quickley. We talked to him a little bit earlier on, but 34, 5, and 3 steals on 10 of 20 overall, 6 of 13 from deep against the Utah Jazz. Just a really electric game from Immanuel Quickley. I think he's certainly come into his own. We've talked a lot about his numbers since he got back on January 31st. He's up to 23, 5, and 6 per 36 minutes on 62% true shooting in that time. Really nice. He had the 3 steals. I think, Darko even praised him on Friday after the Jazz game for what he's been doing defensively since he got back as well. I know there are Quickley skeptics out there. I think a lot of them are kind of outside of Toronto and sort of look at the Raptors like this dumb franchise who does dumb things that they don't understand. That's fine. Whatever. I think Quickley's a good, useful basketball player, and his 3-point shooting is just absolutely game-changing. He's like a 40% above the break 3-point shooter on ridiculous volume. That is so hard to find, and it changed the dynamics of this team entirely, as we saw when he didn't play on Saturday against the Wizards. When you don't have Quickley, the offense is not going to look as good. Scottie's certainly not going to look as good. It was a rough one for Scottie against the Wizards. As we've seen, I think, plenty this year, that the Scottie-led offense is just not it. You got to have other complementary pieces out there. And, I'm in a little bit of sort of withholding judgment mode on Scottie at this point. I've kind of just made my evaluations of him for the season. I have for most of these guys, frankly. These games are not exactly a great canvas upon which to sort of draw conclusions, but I do think, with Scottie, we know that when he's tasked with running the offense and being the main guy, he's going to struggle. He was 4 of 16 against the Wizards. Obviously, you'd hope he could perform better against competition like the Wizards, but, we got to the line 10 times. He kind of salvaged his efficiency that way in some small part. And we know that that's just not what the team is going to look like when things really hit the road next year, right? Brandon Ingram is on this team. Brandon Ingram is yet to play. We've yet to see the effect that Ingram is going to have on easing the burden on Scottie Barnes. We've seen the way Quickley and Barnes, work well together and have been productive. And I think maybe the most encouraging number right now for the Toronto Raptors is that since Quickley kind of got back in earnest on January the 31st, the Toronto Raptors in 359 minutes with Quickley and Barnes on the floor, their most used 2-man pairing, are a plus 2.4 net rating team. The defense is extremely good. The offense, not so great. There's some room to improve there. But over 69 minutes, that is, 369 over the course of, the last month and a half, the Raptors are a comfortable positive plus 2.4 net with those two guys on the floor, despite being a minus 5.8 per 100 over the course of all those minutes as a team. And so they're excelling in the Scottie IQ minutes. They're losing in a lot of the other minutes because obviously they're playing Colin Castleton and his very large neck and all that stuff. But, Quickley, Scottie together, again, reasons to play those guys, to get numbers like this, to get proof of concept like this. And even when Scottie's not performing well, I'm not surprised he didn't go so hot on Saturday when Quickley wasn't there. Those two guys make each other better. Those two guys enhance one another. And in particular, I think Quickley enhances Scottie and gets him into easier spots. In that game against the Jazz, it was a lot of some of the best we've seen of those two guys in concert with one another, where Quickley does a lot of the creation. Scottie benefits from it and sort of uses the leverage of Quickley shooting to get into good spots. 22, 12, and 6 for him in that game. It's a perfectly fine Scottie Barnes game, a nice play finishing game from him. I'm not going to get too worked up over a 4 of 16 in a game where there was no Quickley. And again, how intensely is Scottie Barnes really playing right now? It's not exactly off the charts. I think can't blame him considering the team is just like, yeah, well, we don't really care. Like, that's going to bleed in. Hopefully it's just a blip on the radar. I'm assuming it is. Like, I just think this whole next 6-week stretch, 5-week stretch, whatever we're at now, is going to end up being this sort of weird sort of purgatory time for the Raptors where better things lie ahead. Just right now, it's very strange. One thing I should say, Jamal Shead, I thought he was awesome. It was nice to see him again, especially in that game against the Wizards on Saturday. Nice to see him get some real legitimate run. I do think there's a lot of value to getting these young guys some moments, right? It's not like Orlando Robinson needs them necessarily, but your Jamal Sheads, your Jakob Poeltl when he's healthy, those two guys getting run, Jonathan Mobo when he's healthy as well, getting those guys minutes in close games down the stretch, that's useful. That's valuable. That's real development in real time. So I'm not opposed to seeing more of that. We'll talk more about Jamal Shead coming up in the good, the bad, and the in just a second here, as we will get to that coming up in just a second. We'll talk Shead. We'll talk about Jakob Poeltl and Jared Rhoden. See you, guy. We'll get to that. Close things out. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the #1 sports book in North America. And March Madness is just about here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200, 200 extra bucks, that is, to use on everything but from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. March Madness is going to be a time for all of us Raptors fans, I think, to tune in. There's a lot of guys in college who could be Toronto Raptors in just a few months' time. You want to go check those guys out. It's going to be super fun, very informative. Obviously, not always the most telling thing what happens in the tournament itself. There's the whole season that leads into it, but if there's guys you want to latch on to and watch and maybe throw some money down on their teams, you can go do that with FanDuel to enhance your March Madness viewing experience. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Wrapping it up here on your Monday edition of Locked On Raptors, getting into the good, the bad, and the of course, the thing I liked, the thing I didn't like, and this got me a little bit intrigued from the latest in Toronto Raptors basketball. In this case, 2 basketball games played by your local basketball team over the weekend. Let's get to the good. For me, Jamal Shead's playmaking. Over the weekend, 14 assists to 2 turnovers for Jamal Shead. Of course, he's been rather turnover prone throughout the season, but nice to see him kind of hone that in, get the ball security down. 9 assists to 1 turnover against the Wizards in, pretty extended run in that game. He started against the Wizards. He played, how many minutes did he get in here? He played 29 minutes. That's a big minutes load for Jamal Shead. There was a lot on his plate in that game with no Quickley, and you love to see it to sort of figure out the playmaking stuff and not boot the ball away or throw errant passes or throw irresponsible, unforced turnover, stuff like that. His live dribble passing to me, super impressive, especially on those driving kicks. And he's starting to mix in some more attacking with his left hand. He's been so right hand dominant, right? But attacking from the left, kind of, keeping defenses on their toes a little bit. He found RJ Barrett with one of those kind of the live dribble, lefty skip pass over to the wing for an RJ3. And I just think, there's just so much going on here with Jamal Shead that portends good, reliable NBA basketball player. He's a really heady passer. He hits guys in the shooting pocket. I think he sees a lot of passes that a lot of guys don't see. He can't always make them because he's just 6 feet tall, but the vision is really, really impressive there. And you couple that with the lightning quick first step that we saw on display in crunch time, where he scored 1 bucket against the Wizards and then nearly scored the winner before it got called back with the buzzer beater. which like, man, what a cool moment that would have been for Jamal Shead. I'm sure it felt awesome for the few seconds that he thought it was good. But he's going to be better for that too. Like there's going to be more opportunities like that, I think, down the stretch here for Jamal Shead. Either way, that first step, the catch and shoot success he's had this season, the upside on defense once he irons up the foul stuff as the whistle gets more favorable, as kind of people learn him. I just, everything suggests you feel pretty good about him as your like backup guard of the future as early as next year, right? Like I think it's been quite a crash course for him this season. I think all of the lumps he's taken are valuable lumps. There have been ups and downs. There have been like 3 different rookie walls he's bursted through. I think it's all going to inform him being better next season. And I'm very much in on the Jamal Shead experience, and very cool that he's getting chances to be the dude on offense down the stretch of some of these games. Just a little cherry on top. The bad is Jakob Poeltl getting hurt because, man, oh man, Jakob Poeltl might be the guy that I'm single most interested in watching right now on the Toronto Raptors. He picks up the quad contusion on Friday against the Jazz, doesn't play Saturday. We'll see where he's at for the games lying ahead this week. But I want Jakob Poeltl playing like 35 minutes a game. I want him being fed tons of possessions. I want him being asked to create and kind of work on the on-ball stuff, work on the pull-up game, work on sort of creating for others. And maybe there's some sort of on-ball sort of creativity that you can kind of tap into there and sort of unlock by just giving him those reps right now. It's all useful stuff. And for him to lose a couple games, hopefully not too many, to this quad thing is a little bit of a bummer. He was really good against the Jazz on Friday before he went out. 14 points, 2 of 6 from downtown, 5 of 12 overall. I think, I'm really, really enjoying the Jakob Poeltl experience. I am having a blast, and I want to see more of it because I just think he, to me, of all their young guys, is the most interesting, the highest upside, all of that right now. And I think, any opportunity to see him play, I'm going to be all for it down the stretch. He played 18 minutes before he went out in this game. Seems like he was flirting with more than 30. He should be playing 30, 35 minutes every single night. I think that's what this part of the year is for, and it will certainly help keep it pretty engaging, no doubt, down the stretch. And the for me to wrap up today's show is Jared Rhoden. I'm kind of intrigued. And look, intrigued about two-way guys. We do this all the time, right? We really get ourselves, worked up over, Justin Champagnie is really going to hit. And man, I was really in on Justin Champagnie back in the day. I know there was a whole Jeff Doughton crowd. I never got it. I never quite understood it, but certainly there were people who thought Jeff Doughton was going to be a thing, trademark, et cetera, et cetera. I think with Jared Rhoden, I just, they've got him on the two-way for next year. They signed him to a two-year two-way deal, which is, a thing they've done now with both him and Ulrich Shamshay, kind of ensuring he's going to be in the door next year, ensuring he's part of the program over the summer. And look, guys who are like 25 and have been sort of historical G League players, very rare those guys are going to pop. It's also great when one of those guys does pop. It's like found money and it's really helpful. And I think what we're seeing from Rhoden is there's like an avenue for him, I think, to be one of those kinds of guys who pops. He probably won't because these guys very rarely do. But I think the way he's got just like an NBA level interior strength, like he can kind of get to spots near the rim and just kind of bump dudes off of him. He is as cut as anyone on this basketball team. He's like very strong. He looks like a square up top. He kind of is built like a linebacker or running back. And I think, that's a nice NBA friendly skill to see if he can kind of tap into that and help him become an effective around the rim scorer. We'll see about the shooting. I do think the defense is kind of interesting with him too. He's looked pretty good. Against the Wizards, I thought he was very effective and efficient. 13, 4 of 8 overall. It'd be nice to see some threes fall for him, no doubt. But, of the guys that we're talking about here, the sort of fringy cases, Orlando Robinson, Colin Castleton, AJ Lawson, I think Jared Rhoden is the most interesting of that bunch. And I'm curious to see what he's got down the stretch. It feels like, at the very least, he can have himself the Jamias Ramsey close to the season from last year, where it's like, Jamias Ramsey, maybe he's a guy. He wasn't a guy, but he had moments where it seemed like maybe he was one. And so looking forward to a little more Jared Rhoden. He's been kind of fun. We're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for rocking with the show. I'm sorry I can't get more indignant about the way the Raptors are handling these things, but I don't really think there's a blueprint for how you're supposed to handle a schedule where you're trying to lose, but you're playing all the worst teams in the world every single night. And it's just a lot to balance, and it's very difficult. Hakuna Matata, baby. It's gonna end up where it ends up. 5th, 6th, or 7th in the odds. All are perfectly fine. The Raptors once jumped up to get Scottie Barnes from 7th in the odds. What are you gonna do? It's flattened lottery world. Just embrace it and enjoy the little fun pops of Jamal Shead getting almost game winners and Jared Rhoden having moments and Colin Castleton having little stretches and Immanuel Quickley popping off for moments, and deal with that and accept that for what it is. This stretch of schedule is going to be kind of unpleasant. It's going to be repetitive, I think, and we're going to have not a whole lot in terms of like fresh, fun stuff to talk about as we go down the stretch. Please keep listening to the podcast, though, by the way. And, we'll see where it all ends. But I do think better things lie ahead. I think this team going into next year has a very good chance of being a playoff team, and or at least flirting with the playoffs and getting into the mid 40s and wins, which is an awesome place to be. Great starting point to sort of build and layer on top of that some more. And I think, where they pick doesn't affect that at all. The pick they get will certainly help enhance the future. And if they really get lucky and get a super high pick, then everything really changes for the long haul. But I don't think you can count on that. I think you can kind of build your entire plan or ethos around that. They're doing, I think, as reasonable a job as you could hope for to kind of manage where they're at right now amid the circumstances. I know some people just want to see them sit everybody. They're just not going to sit everybody. Like, you got to be realistic. It's just not going to happen. Maybe later in the year. Again, maybe if the Bulls go on a heater, maybe if you end up with, the last 10 games, maybe that's where things start to really get unethical and they sit everyone down, but it's still a little bit early for that. And, they're going to lose games just fine, like they did against the Wizards, like they did against the Bulls. There will be more losses. I have very little doubt about that. And there will be some wins too. I also have very little doubt about that because of, have you seen the schedule? Either way, thank you so much for rocking with the show. We'll be back again on Tuesday to talk about another Raptors Wizards classic on Monday night. Big V, Vivek, Jacob will be back on Wednesday as well. I might take one day off the podcast this week just because I'm going to see my parents for vacation and all that stuff, but we'll sort that out a little later in the week. Either way, thanks so much for hanging. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Not even remotely close.